get started. So my name is Paula Capes. I'm with Falcon National Bank, and I'm the vice chair of our business development committee. So I work with Doug. Thank you for coming again. This has been a fun planning event that we have taken some time. I'm sure Doug has maybe already mentioned this, but just want to personally say thank you to all of you for attending and being here for this. It's exciting to have this conference this morning. So right now I am going to introduce Jacobs Financial, and also Betsy is with Nova 401k Associates. So I will hand it over to you guys.
Right.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Paul. Appreciate it. All right. Good morning, everybody. My name is Andy Jacobs. I'm one of the senior partners with Jacobs Financial, and this is my business partner, Dave Jacobs. I could do a little more talking. I think he's getting a little cold or something. So stay away from him a little bit. And Betsy is with Nova. Jacobs Financial, just a little bit about us. We've been in business for just like 51 years now this year, and we're independently operated and owned. We do specialize in the 401k retirement plan business. Been doing that for quite a while. Probably manage about, 70 plans or so, mainly more local and in Minnesota, but across the nation. We do some consulting for other firms and stuff as well. We do partner with other partners, and one of the partners is Nova, and they're a TPA. For those that don't know what that means, is a third-party administrator. So sometimes plans can be we call unbundled or bundled, and they provide kind of, if you will, more of the administration and law to make sure everything is running the way it's supposed to be running. And they've been a great partner. We've worked with them quite a bit, and I really appreciate you coming to help us do this presentation. So Betsy's going to take it from here, and she's going to run through everything. But Dave and I will probably interject a little bit along the way. That's fair.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, guys, and thanks to Jacobs Financial for having me out. Thank you, Doug, for coordinating all of this. This is great that we have a full room. Like these guys said, so I'm Betsy Kelly. I'm a retirement plan consultant for Nova 401k Associates, and for those who have never heard of Nova, just like Andy said, we're a third-party administration firm, or a TPA firm. I like to joke around, we're kind of the nerds behind the scenes when it comes to retirement plans. So we're doing all of the 5500 plan design, compliance testing, basically everything to make sure that the plan is compliant with the IRS and the DOL. And then Nova as a whole, we're actually the largest organically grown TPA firm in the country. And we're the top TPA partner to a lot of the well-known record keepers that you guys might even already have with your companies. You know, the John Hancock's, Voyas of the world. And then I'm personally I'm local. So I'm actually born and raised Minnesota. I just live in Blaine. And I guess the only fun fact you want to know about me is, yes, I'm a retirement plan nerd, but I am obsessed with golf. I play professionally a little bit. So if you guys need a ringer, I think that's why these guys really like me. But I feel like I'm cheating from the red tees. So we'll, the same color chamber event, golf tournament maybe. But anyways, so we've got the Secure 2.0, which there is a lot of new changes in the retirement plan world. I think Doug laughed when I sent him a slideshow that had 60 slides on it. So I actually tried to cut it down quite a bit. But we are going to, I'm going to try and just make it, hit on the main topics here that we want you guys to take away from this. And then ultimately open it up at the end for questions for myself or Andy or Dave. And again, yeah, thanks to Jacobs Financial. I know they hit on it, but they specialize in this space. They're local right here in St. Cloud. They're amazing. So I appreciate you guys. Let's see if I know how to work this clicker. Disclosures, we always have those in our industry. Agenda, I'm really just going to hit, mainly what I'm going to talk about is going to be all on this, just some of the 401k reforms. I'll hit a little bit on some of the compliance changes with retirement plans, the tax credits, which are really exciting, especially with the Minnesota Secure Choice, which is coming up. And then just plan amendments. So yeah, and you guys, some of you might even be taking notes, but big thing to start is the mandatory automatic enrollment. So if you don't have a 401k plan yet for your company, if you started a plan in 2023, 2024, or moving forward, starting in 2025, you have to have automatic enrollment on your plan. So automatic enrollment at 3%, and then we have to auto-escalate that by 1% every year up to 10%. And some of you are probably like, well, that's going to be a pain from an administrative standpoint. So that is the big news for startup plans. Now, there's a few exemptions for this. If you started your plan before 2023, you're fine. New companies, so if you're a brand new company as of this year, you don't have to have that in place by 2025, but just know that you would have to have it starting in 2027. Also, if you're a small company with less than 10 employees or less, then you don't have to have automatic enrollment and auto escalation. It's only for companies with 11 or more employees. Like, I've done a few plans recently where business owner was like, they know their business better than I do, and they're like, look, we're never going to have more than 10 employees, so we just didn't have that. On the plan. And then obviously, if you're a governmental or a church plan, you're exempt from this as well.
So a simple plan is exempt? Is how that was listed first? A simple.
Oh, yep. So that's a simple. A simple IRA is exempt from that. Yeah. One thing Nova is doing, and this is really for anyone, so if you don't have automatic enrollment on your plan and you just started your plan, obviously we have to go in and amend the plan document to add automatic enrollment starting 2025. Now for Nova clients, we don't charge for amendments, that's included in our pricing, so clients aren't getting nickel and dime for that, but if you're in the room and you do have to add that, just be aware that you might have to have that change coming. Really the big thing here is, the record keepers, they're all ready for all of this. My biggest concern is payroll, because if your payroll provider doesn't fully integrate with the record keeper, and now all of a sudden you have to have automatic enrollment, auto escalation, and we're busy, right? Like, we don't have time to check our emails, let alone do we have time to do all these things on the plan, and if payroll is not talking to the record keeper. So for me, that's the big thing. Now, there's ways that we can provide services for that, right? But just know that that's coming, and we can absolutely help with that. I feel like there was one other thing I wanted to talk about on this. MEPS, and a lot of people think you can go hide in these MEPS and TEPS, which are the big conversation right now, and you can't. So you're a company, you don't have a 401k plan yet, you can't go into a MEP or a PEP and get around the automatic enrollment. The one thing I was going to say is, and I don't know if anyone in the room here doesn't, like if you're a business owner, and you don't have a 401k plan yet, a couple things, and I'll talk on it more later, but Minnesota is requiring that you do get a 401k plan or some sort of retirement plan starting in 2025. Now, from a plan design perspective, and this is where, Jacobs Financial, they bring me in as well to help design these plans, but one way around this automatic enrollment and auto escalation is we're just setting up plans to automatically enroll at 10%, which is just, it doesn't make sense. A lot of people look at me and say, well, no one's going to want to automatically enroll at 10%, and you're right, employees might want to opt out, or they might enroll and then change down to 4%. But it at least takes you off the hook as the business owner from having to worry about, oh, I have to go change from 3 to 4% and whatnot. Does that all make sense?
Betsy, you want to touch base on what a MEP and PEP is?
Yeah, that's.
Yeah. Yeah, so multiple employer plans are these pooled employer plans, which, they're a hot topic the last few years where, companies are basically joining these, think of it as like an umbrella. And you're joining in under the one plan under this umbrella. Now, a lot of small companies think that they're gonna actually save fees on these types of things, but ultimately, they have their time and place depending on which, and maybe you guys can speak a little more on it, but what I actually see sometimes for like PEPs, for example, are audited plans. So if your plan's currently getting audited because you have over 100 employees, audit fees are expensive, so I don't know if anyone is dealing with that, but that's when sometimes people will join a PEP because there's only one audit for the whole PEP. And you're eliminating, that audit fee. But to me, this is like the flashy new tool in the room, or, golf purposes, it's like, hey, we have a brand new golf club, and this is the hottest thing, but it doesn't always make sense for everybody. Is there anything more you guys want to touch on that?
Yeah, I think some of the more popular ones that we've come across, like the Automotive Manufacturers Association has a PEP that some dealerships would jump into. But oftentimes the companies price the record keepers, the Fidelities, the Voyas, the John Hancocks of earth, they price their plans based off the average deposits. So if you have 50 employees and the average deposit account values are X, if that matches up with what the PEP might be, then you're really not saving any dollars, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So if you didn't have a retirement plan at all and you had 150 employees and you're starting out, you had to pay an audit fee to an auditor for $10,000. That's where the cost can maybe be some savings.
Mm-hmm. So they definitely have a time and place for some companies. We also have like the exchanges, which are kind of like group plans, but you're still a single company with your own plan design, your own 5,500. You're just kind of getting, I look at that, and we don't talk about that a whole lot, but it's kind of like a self-driving car for retirement plans. But not all people want to pay for the self-driving car or need it. Some of us like our old, pickup trucks. So, yeah, so that's a good point. Rothification of catch-up contributions. So this is also a new rule. Catch-up contributions for anyone over 50 years old, if they're making over $145,000, you have to make the catch-up contribution as a Roth contribution. So it's interesting. This actually takes, let me go to this next one. Actually, I'll hit on this first. It doesn't apply to partners or sole props, but ultimately, we have to make sure that the plan has a Roth provision, which most 401k plans have Roth provision now, but just know that if those employees are making catch-up contributions, because they're over 50 years old, that has to be contributed as a Roth if they're in those, if they're making over $145,000.
And that's just the IRS wanting to tax those higher income earners, that extra $7,000 or $7,500. They're going to be typically at a higher tax bracket, so they're just going to get that, IRS is just going to get that revenue from that then.
Yeah, they're always trying to take more of our money. So, Nova, we are proactively going back and looking at all of our plans and making sure that we have Roth on all of our plans. Like I said, most plans do have a Roth provision. It's a huge benefit, especially for younger employees. But and then if a company doesn't want to do or have the Roth provision, which again I don't know why they wouldn't, but then we have to amend the plan document to take catch-ups out. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. How will this be taxed? Just like Dave said, it's going to be applied to the client's W-2, so it's income. The increased catch-up contributions, so this starts in 2025. If you're over 50 right now, it's $7,500 for the catch-up contribution. So for clients who are, or employees who are between 60 to 63 years old, just those ages in particular, they have the ability to have their catch-up contribution be up to 150%. I think it's actually up to 10,000, which I don't have the actual 10,000 in this, but it's a really, really great benefit. It's actually indexed for inflation as well, but just know that that's also coming. Long-term part-time employees. This is like everyone's news. This is a hot topic. So the long-term part-time employees is actually starting this year. What this means is a lot of plans, and maybe your own plan has this provision, but you can exclude employees under 1,000 hours or part-time employees. Now, the government wants this whole new push of making sure that everyone has access to some sort of retirement plan. So now they've termed this long-term part-time employees for anyone working between 500 and 999 hours. You know, simple enough, call it 500 to 1,000. So yeah, if you guys want to write that down. Or, you know, if you have employees, two things. If you are excluding employees under 1,000 hours, you're going to run into the, and then you also, the second thing, have employees working between that 500 to 1,000 hour mark. Those are potentially long-term part-time employees. Now, the actual rule is those employees have to be working for 3 12-month periods, consecutive periods in a row, to be considered a long-term part-time employee. I think, let me see, right here. So, as of this year, if you look back at 21, 22, 2023, and you have employees in that range, they're a long-term part-time employee. Starting next year, it's 2 years. So 2 years of between 500 to 1,000 hours, they're a long-term part-time employee. Now what does this mean? Well, they have to be allowed to defer into the 401k plan. Even if you have the 1,000-hour requirement on the plan, or excluding part-time employees, these long-term part-time employees must have the option to defer into the plan. Now the good news, because you know most companies have a match, or you have to make some sort of contribution, like the non-elective. They're completely excluded from all that and excluded from testing, which is a good point. So they're kind of in their own little world. But from an administration standpoint, like even from NOVA's perspective, this is the biggest pain, because now we have to track all this. Like we have to make sure that we're tracking employees dated back 2-3 years and doing all that math, right? So.
And if you do miss them, you can go back and self-correct the plan. But even if they didn't put dollars in, you're responsible for the missed opportunity for that employee.
Yeah. And that can become, costly. So anytime you miss deferral opportunities, so that's a good point. So we
have questions.
Yep.
So it goes into effect in 2025, but it'll look back 3 years?
It actually goes into effect this year. So we have to look back 2021, 2022, 2023. If you have employees in that range between 500 hours to 999, that would be otherwise excludable. Starting this year, they have to be eligible. And it's so funny because we're all like, there's so many rules. I mean, I have good job security, I guess, but it's even like for someone like us that we specialize in all of this, it's so crazy how us everyday people with our own jobs, and like you guys are really good at what you do at your companies, and that's like a foreign language to me at most. And then all of a sudden you're supposed to remember all these things, right? That's why it's nice though when you do work with good partners that do a lot of this for you. But yes, this is the big thing. Now I don't know if I have a slide on this. Yeah, this is the one I probably want to get to. I pretty much hit on all this, but the problem here is if you are excluding those part-time employees, Now, from an administrative standpoint, one thing that I'm recommending on plans is, just to keep it simple, if you do have that 1,000-hour requirement, why don't we just knock it down to 500 hours? Then we don't have to worry about it, and, we're just including those employees, or you're just taking that 1,000-hour, you're adding them in. But depending on your company, that can create issues, because if you allow too many people in, that's, you're increasing the cost on the plan, right? Because you now have more eligibles, you have more account balances. But this is the whole government's push, is to try and get more people saving for retirement, which is great. But, and I don't think I have a slide on this, but the eligible employees, so if your company is around that 100 employee mark with eligibles, and you actually have some room up until 120 for a plan audit, but it's no longer based on eligible employees for plan audits. It is now only on account balances, which is great. I know auditors are upset because they're not auditing as many plans, but so I'm just speaking out loud as we're talking about different plan design. If you were to allow more people into the plan, at least you don't have to worry about eligibles and running into audit costs. You guys have any questions on that? No. Disaster distributions, we're not in a hurricane state. I hope we don't have too many natural disasters, but you are allowed to take up to $22,000 now out. You must take that within the first 180 days if there were a natural disaster, and you can repay that back anytime. There's no 10% penalty. A lot of the stuff I'm going to talk about here in the next few slides, it's basically just new things that eliminate that 10% tax penalty if employees needed to get money out of the plan. The loans, this one's pretty important. Typically, if you do have loans on the plan, the limits right now are it's the lesser of 50% of your vested balance, or 50,000, and that's going up to 100. So it's 100% of your vested balance and 100,000. Now you'd have to amend the plan document to do that. And a lot of these things, you're going to have to amend the plan document to do these things. But they're coming, so just so you know. Qualified birth and adoption distributions. This is really if you have a kid or you adopt. This is saying that you can actually take out $5,000 per parent. So, mom, dad, you can both take out $5,000 each without that 10% penalty, and you can, repay that back whenever if you'd like. Distributions for emergency personal expenses. NOVA, for example, we're not going to make this a default in our plan document because it's going to. We don't want tons of employees saying, hey, I just need to get $100 or $500 out as an emergency. But it is available. Essentially, if you do need, you have some sort of emergency, transmission went out in the car, I don't know. You're allowed to take out up to $1,000 out of the plan without that 10% penalty. Again, nothing that I think I'd want to push, but
Other things that record keepers, of course, the government puts out laws, and then the record keepers have to figure out how to do it on a technology basis. So there's other things that are probably coming down the pipeline, like student loan repayment through the 401ks, like a savings account within the 401ks. So that could be applicable with some of these emergency. Touching base on it right now.
oh, it's perfect. It's like he knew the next slide was coming. Yeah, no, this is a good point. All these record keepers, the John Hancock, Voya, and Powers of the world, they're pumping money, tons of money into their tools and resources and their participant experience to incorporate things like these. Not all of them can handle it all, though. But like the emergency savings account, I know quite a few are kind of hyping that one up. So this is start putting money into the, bless you. I wanna start putting money into the plan as kind of my emergency savings bucket, and you're now allowed to do that. It's considered a Roth contribution, and you can do that at $2,500. It's just a cool little value add, I guess, especially, it's crazy, you know, Americans are really bad at, we are all really bad at having that emergency savings bucket, right? So this is just a really good way to do that. And then if you do need to take money out, you cannot be, you know, I need to take money out, we're not allowed to charge you fees on taking that money out up to 4 times, yeah, 4 times a year, which is nice. So it is kind of like a true savings account. The distributions for domestic abuse take down, so just know that that's also an option. We would hope, pray to God, that this would never happen to anybody, but it would be there if they need it. The early distributions for terminal illness, you know, nothing really new here. That's just, you know, obviously if a participant becomes terminally ill, they can get their money out of the plan. I want to say too, maybe I'm coming up on this. The student loans. It's probably a few slides ahead. I hope I didn't delete it because I showed Doug a 60 slide. If I did delete it, I'll come back. But this one's vague, so I don't know if anyone in the room has a simple IRA right now. But so you can now go from a simple IRA to a 401k plan mid-calendar year, where in the past you had to wait. So, you know, because you couldn't have contributions going into the plan to the simple IRA and the 401k same calendar year. So now we can actually do that at any time in the middle of the plan year. And the big thing is obviously the contribution limits, right? We're going from $16,000 to $23,000 plus employer contributions, and then ultimately the Roth component is pretty big on that. But we can now do that. The kicker is you get, just for this year, for example, limits are prorated. So if we clean cut, call it converted, you know, July 1st, your limits for deferrals would be, you know, half the simple IRA limits, so half of 16,000, 8,000, and then half of the 23,000 would be your limits. But ultimately, a ton of owners are doing this right now. And then the other thing was, if you do have a simple IRA, there was that rule where you couldn't move those assets in that 2-year period, and now that's no longer existent. You can roll over those assets into a safe harbor 401k plan. So that is, and that's all brand new this year.
And I think just to add to that, when we were consulting with businesses on what type of retirement plan to work with, oftentimes there's a couple different things. One is what's important to the employees, but then the second, of course, is what's important to the business owners, what you're trying to accomplish. There's probably a misconception that the expenses for administrating plans has significantly come down for 401k. So it used to be, you know, a decade plus ago where administration might cost $5,000. So closely held small businesses just didn't want to pay that administration expense. Now those expenses are, you know, maybe you might have 20 employees and it might cost $1,500 for administration, but then there's tax credits to offset that. So
You probably have slides on tax credits.
Oh, the tax credits are so great. You guys are gonna love this. I mean, especially for anyone that doesn't have a plan in place, and I'll talk about what's coming, but, yeah, that's a really good point.
In
And-
this, oh, sorry.
No,
I was
you
gonna say,
go.
in this, the Secure 2.0, anybody have a guess, like how many provisions are in the total bill? There's like one.
It's insane. That's why I was
It's just,
kidding when I
there's
had
so
this.
much, it's one of the largest changes in bills for the retirement plan industry that they've ever passed.
Ever.
It's
And-
it's just ginormous.
That's why I'm like, I hope we don't have a Secure 3.0 coming anytime soon. We're all gonna still be learning 2.0.
Right.
They can't a good point. So and I guess I'm the golfer here, but obviously every business is different, so we're always trying to design the best plan for you and your employees. And I look at it like the golf clubs in my bag, your wedges are gonna go the least furthest. It's kinda like your simple IRAs and your SEPs. And you got the 401k, which maybe be like an 8-iron. A 401k profit sharing, a hybrid. And then, we can do some really fancy stuff. And I relate it to like the driver in the bag for getting business owners $200,000+ deductions, which is really cool. And that's like with the cash balance plans. Here we go. The student loan, I was thinking I didn't delete this slide. The student loan matching contribution. So you can now make the employer contribution as a student loan repayment to your employees. So obviously this is geared towards a lot of the younger employees at your company, but you're allowed to do this. Same goes for the record keeper conversation. It's going to be a thing that you just need to make sure the record keeper is prepared for. It's simple as that, right? So just know that it's available. Obviously, you have to make sure that your plan allows for it. So we would have to amend the plan document to allow for the student loan repayments.
And then when you talk about simple, we were talking about simple 401k, not simple
Yeah.
IRA.
Yeah,
So
I hate how
there's a
that's even on there.
distinction between simple 401k and a simple IRA. So just
Yeah.
note that.
Kind of on that note, couple questions, I guess. So if an employer has 3% or 3% contribution in an IRA, does this law change it? They have to move it to a 401k, or is that part of what are they covered? So if anybody in here's got 11 employees or more and is doing a 3% IRA, do they have to do anything right now, or
Oh, you mean if they're offering a simple IRA?
if they're already doing an IRA contribution?
The simple IRA.
Simple IRA?
Yeah.
Yeah,
simple.
yeah.
Okay, is that qualified for this law, or is that they're gonna have to move that to
Yeah,
something
they would
else?
have to go to a 401k plan.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the other thing, I don't wanna take up too much time. but-
No, we have so much time.
So, I mean, this is probably more for Dave and Andy. Smaller employers, under 10, maybe they don't have to have this, but are you finding that, some of them are opting to do it to be competitive with larger employers? And will the tax credits offset some of those costs so that they can afford to do that?
Yes and yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So if they don't have a plan at all and they're starting from scratch, really it's just like, here's the options A, B, and C. Which one makes sense? Does the simple IRA plan make sense? Here's the pros and cons. Here's the 401k. Yes, there's administration expenses because you're custom designing your own document for what works for your business. There's a cost to do that, but the credits can offset that to having nothing out of pocket.
And only the last thing is, I do have a spot on my team for the golf outing for Jacobs Financial.
I have it blocked in my calendar. I don't know what team I'm on yet. So,
I had an
I'll
open
be
spot
there.
too.
What is it, June 7th? Yeah. That's good. So really next is just some compliance changes, which I kind of want to cruise through, and then we're going to talk tax credits, which are exciting. I don't even know how much time I want to spend on this, but essentially, the missed deferral contributions is a hot topic, and it's going to be an even hotter topic once all this automatic enrollment happens and the auto escalation. And you might even be a company that's already experienced this, where you said, oh, whoops, we completely missed contributions for these employees or whatnot. Nova does these kinds of corrections all the time. Essentially, you have to make that correction no later than 9.5 months after the plan year in which it occurred. So it gives us some time, but you do have to go back and make contributions, and Nova calculates that all for you. But the good news is that now if you have a terminated employee before that correction, you don't have to give that to them, which is nice. So I think that's the big thing there. Family attribution of ownership, this one's really interesting. I actually just did a solo K, which this came up. Typically you have husband-wife, and because they're husband-wife, they have attribution of ownership for the company. You know, husband owns company, wife is now considered an owner from a compliance perspective. The new law says that if you have husband-wife and they have no involvement whatsoever, they actually do not, and they're not involved from like a management perspective, there is no attribution from a control group perspective. So, example, I had a husband with a company, sole business owner, no employees. The wife was she owned her own company, no employees, and they wanted their, you know, from a compliance perspective, they just wanted to have one plan that covered both companies for them. So they didn't have to, you know, double up fees, plan document and whatnot. Well, with new rules, they're technically not control group because they have no affiliation with each other's companies. So we had to get in writing, you know, hey, we do, you know, we're on each other's board essentially, which sounds really weird, but in order for that to work. So it's just interesting, just one quick little rule, I guess, and it'll be a big thing for obviously the control group issues. And same thing for this, the attribution with a minor child. So if you have a minor child, you know, and you own, there's no attribution of ownership now to the parents. So from a control group perspective, you know, parent owns a business or child owns a business, there's no more attribution of ownership.
And control group is like common ownership in multiple different businesses. So oftentimes, like if Andy and I are 50-50 owners in Jacobs Financial, but he's got a property company, I got a property company, we have a joint property company. We have to take in the percentage of ownership to see if there's control group issues.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, it's like the same 5 or fewer own 80% or more of the business. Is really simple enough, the definition of a control group. Retroactive sole proprietorship deferrals. This is awesome, and this is going to be for like those sole business owners. And I don't know if we have anyone in the room like that. You know, single business owner, no employees. We can now retroactively make deferrals as long as you're a sole prop. So here we are. You know, it's tax season. I'm a sole prop. And I'm like, I really wanted to get a retirement plan in place for 2023, but I forgot. So there's, you know, we can retroactively go back now. And in the past, you could make contributions, but you were restricted for the, you know, employee salary deferrals. But now you can go back and make those contributions, so you can get up to the full, you know, for 2024, the full 69,000 limits. You can only do that though if you're a sole prop or an LLC taxed as a sole prop. Because for example, if you are taxed as an S corp, you're paying yourself a W-2, even though you're your own business owner. And obviously you need to see those salary deferrals going out in that plan year on your W-2. So that's just a quick, I don't know if it even applies to anyone in this room. RMD changes. So this is a big one. The RMDs are now, if you were born after 1960, your RMD is now going to be at 75. And really anyone, you know, before that is either 73 or 72.
What does RMD stand for?
Required minimal
Yeah,
distribution.
required minimum distribution. Yeah, sorry.
The IRS
I
wants
had
you
to
to take
read
your
a little
money
bit,
out.
oh, okay.
Yeah. So the IRS is requiring you to take your retirement dollars out of your qualified plans, IRAs, 401ks, simples, etc.
Yeah, and my apologies. I know there's so many acronyms in our industry, and so so I appreciate that.
Again, job security.
Job security, there's so much. And it's like a foreign language to a lot of people, so that one's big, which is exciting because
And people are working longer either by choice or, because they have to, but that's part of it is, I think, a benefit to give them a longer opportunity that they don't have to spend those monies
Yeah.
if they are working.
Here's the other good one. I would hope that nobody ever misses taking their RMD, which is what good financial advisors will do, is they'll make sure that clients are taking those RMDs out once they hit that age. Previously, if you didn't do that, there was a penalty on that amount, and it was 50%. It was insane. So I mean, think about even I know advisors who, that's like when your heart drops and you're like, oh my gosh, I might have to pay this myself. Doesn't happen a lot, but it did. It's a big penalty. So now they reduced that to 25%, and then if you, if you actually correct it within 2 years, it's 10%. So this was a really, really big one, which is exciting.
Now,
That
Andy,
does happen.
with me, now Tyler would let me know that this is happening, correct?
No, we wouldn't.
Yeah.
I'll throw Tyler on the bus. No.
Okay,
Yes, yeah. for
okay,
sure,
so
Like,
it's not
um,
something I need to worry about,
No.
Tyler would.
Yeah,
Yeah,
as
and
Betsy mentioned it,
yeah,
the financial planner should tell you, here's what you have to take out for this particular calendar year.
and that includes IRAs.
Right,
Outside
that's
money.
why I was like, okay, now
But
wait a
like,
minute.
like the record keepers, the Boyas and the John Hancocks, they'll have the systems and the technology in place where it'll generate, and the plan sponsor will know, that participant will know, they'll get notification, and it's probably rarely missed because the technology is
Okay,
good these days. But on the IRAs, it can be missed. And we've had new clients come in, they're like, I've had issues, and, didn't know it had to come out, and, so we help them clean that up, but yeah, even the IRAs.
And you might not touch on this, but there's beneficiary IRA rules which are different now as well.
Yeah,
So that's a separate topic other than the 401k. But
yeah,
the beneficiary IRAs have a different schedule than they used to as well.
and that's under the Secure 2.0, so that's a whole mess now.
Everyone remembers all this now, right? It's a lot. I'm going to touch on a lot of this stuff real brief because I want to dig into the tax credits. Because we have like a couple minutes.
15.
15?
Yeah, 15.
Oh, awesome. Okay. Participant notices. This is just kind of a weird one, but we do require now that notices or like statements must be delivered at least once a year on paper. Participants can elect out of that, but we do require it. DB plans, it's every 3 years, so just an actual paper notice. The other one is, this is the one that I haven't even totally gotten down to heart yet, but if obviously a client is not participating in the plan, you don't have to send them those notices. The only ones that you wouldn't, let's see here. Yeah, that's pretty much the main thing is you have to send out that one notice per paper every year. The force out limits, this one's exciting. So if you have small balances right now in the plan document, you can force out employees with those small balances under 5,000. This helps reduce costs in the plan for you guys. You can now increase this to 7,000. The only bummer is that they're not adjusting this for the cost of living, so this will not increase until Secure 3.0, I guess. But you do have to add this into the plan document as well. Amend the plan document for that change.
So for the forced out limit increase, how does that impact the long-term part-time employees then?
Same thing. So this is like if you're terminated balance.
Oh.
Yeah, sorry, I should have clarified that. I work for a company and I leave, and now I have this little small balance still at the company. It's sad, but a lot of times people forget about those. But you can now auto force that out, and client they get notified and everything. It gets rolled over to an IRA, but you can increase that to 7,000. So this one, what did I want to hit on for this? problem. I forgot the number, but there are so many Americans that have these 401k plans sitting out there, and they have no idea where they're at, and they have no idea. They have a couple $1,000 sitting there. So it's now required that the DOL is creating this lost and found database where you can go in and plug in your social security number, and essentially they can pull all that data, and that's found through the mandatory forms that like NOVA puts together on those participants with balances in plans. So that's kind of cool.
Where that comes into play oftentimes is a company, XYZ company might use Fidelity as their record keeper, and then they have some termed participants that still have money in the plan. And then the company chooses to move from Fidelity to, say, Empower. Well, if the person wasn't paying attention and the individual that's no longer working there, next thing you know, they're like, well, I had money at Fidelity, now I don't know where my money is, and then they forget about it, and that money's still there. Now it's moved over to another new record keeper, but they have to find the resources to track that down, or they might just completely forget about it.
Or a company gets acquired and there's a new company, and I worked for XYZ company, and the company doesn't even exist anymore. I have no idea where to even begin. We get a lot of those questions with individual people that think they have plans out there. So yeah, that database will be good.
Yeah, it's going to be really, really good. This is a fun topic. So I guess before I dig into the tax credits, like does any, and you guys I guess don't have to raise your hands, but does anyone not have a retirement plan in place yet for their company? Okay, so we do have a few.
And we don't have a 401.
So I'll tell you this first. I don't know if you guys have heard of the Minnesota Secure Choice program that's coming out, but Minnesota and other states have done this where they've required retirement plans. But Minnesota, starting in 2025, if you have 5 or more employees at your company, you must offer some sort of retirement plan. And if you don't, then you're forced into the state IRA program, which I hate to admit it, but it's not good. So we're still waiting on guidance, but it's ultimately just an IRA, and there's going to be a lot of issues that, if I'm automatically enrolled into the state IRA, but I have an IRA with Jacobs Financial, who's keeping track of my limits there? So there's just so many things that could come about. We still don't know the investment options, and ultimately though, so that's what's coming. So 2025, this is a mandate, and there's just better options that we can put in place for you guys, for your company and your employees, to your goals. So that's coming. The tax credits are fun though, because government's like, hey, we're going to make you do this, but at least they're giving us tax credits, which really starting a 401k plan right now is like almost free. It's actually really, really cool. So there's really a couple different startup tax credits. So first, and it was the same thing for simple IRAs, right? A lot of people in the past just did simples because they said, well, I don't want to pay for costs of the 401k plan. Well, now that conversation is almost not even applicable because you get up to 100% of all startup plan costs for starting a retirement plan for the first 3 years. So that's tax credit number 1. I guess I should say your CPA is going to actually, calculate the tax credits. Like that's not something NOVA does, but we can all talk about it very high level and pretty much estimate what they are. This is the actual formula, so it's up to $5,000. So if you have a couple grand in tax, couple grand in costs, you can get that offset. This is in effect right now. The second one, which this is the really exciting component, is the employer tax credit. So you can actually get, and this will be applicable for you guys, you can get up to $1,000 per employee making less than 100 grand. And it's a tax credit. So it's great. I'm like, wow, the government did something amazing for us. So this is huge because, and when you think about a tax credit, it's not a tax deduction, it's a true tax credit. So we've seen some pretty significant tax credits on these startup plans. Now, Now for this one, it's $1,000 per employee, so you know, you have 10 employees making under 100,000, that's 10 grand. The 10 grand though starts to veer off in year 3, 4, and 5, so it goes to like 75% and 50% and 25%. But ultimately, for the first 5 years of your 401k plan, you're getting so much back. And this is just the push, right? We're just trying to get every company and people into saving for retirement. I don't know why I don't have it on here, but the third is the automatic enrollment tax credit. This applies for everybody. So regardless if you're a startup plan or you have a plan in place, if you add automatic enrollment onto your plan, you get a tax credit of $500 per year for 3 years. So the total tax credit is $1,500. Just something, you know, you can add on really at any time. But that one's also really important. Startup tax credits, you know, you still, if you join, this is back to the MEP conversation, if you join like a MEP, you can still get these tax credits, is essentially what this is saying. No double dipping, so, you know, obviously you're talking to your CPA when it comes to actually calculating these, but they're saying, you know, you can't get the deduction and the tax credit. Plan amendments, we're getting near here, this is pretty much the last slide, but ultimately, all of these changes that we're talking about today, we have to amend the plan document by the end of 2025 to accommodate for a lot of these, and this is just an industry standard. So whether you have NOVA on your plan or whoever is, you know, maintaining your plan document, all of these changes are coming. And I guess I probably should have started this entire thing by talking about what the plan document is, but it's kind of like the owner's manual in your car, in outlining how the car is supposed to be operated. You know, you guys, no one looks at it. We do. But we essentially have to amend, you know, your owner's manual in your car to make sure you're operating the plan according to that. That'll all be taken care of end of 2025. This is just talking about, you know, there's just so much. We don't think that there's a Secure 3.0 coming soon. There's just too much, you know, 192 different divisions and updates. But yeah, I feel like I've been talking for a very long time. So I want to open this up for questions.
Yeah. You mentioned that if you had a 401k plan in place before 2023, that the mandatory auto enrollment wasn't
Correct.
a factor.
Yeah, so if that's the case for you, then it's not a factor at all. It's just startup plans that started in 2023. And I think you guys heard the question, so it's the automatic enrollment and auto escalation is just for startup plans in 2023 and forward. So that has to be made by 2025.
Reasons that, go ahead.
The auto escalation is applied to plans that have 2021 or 2022.
Correct.
Yeah.
You can do it, but
You don't have to.
We're seeing about, I would say almost like 50% of plans now have auto enrollment. It's just becoming more of the norm. The key is making sure the payroll system can accommodate that so nothing's missed.
that's a good point. And like, you know, for even you, if you wanted to, I mean, at the end of the day, I think auto escalation is great, right? Because it's so minimal of what's coming out of the employee's paychecks and it's helping them save more. But if your payroll can't accommodate it, that's when it becomes an issue. So if the payroll has that 360-degree integration with the record keeper, you know, the Paylocities and Paycor of the world are kind of the two big ones, then it's easy. But otherwise, it's like, you know.
If an employee has a 401k plan from a previous employer, are they able to roll that into their new plan with their current employer?
Yep, absolutely. As long as the plan document allows for it, but it should.
Okay.
So
if that employee has someone somewhere else, do you also have to have a 401K for them?
If you don't have, if your company doesn't have any plan and you meet that criteria for the state mandate, you'll have to have a plan regardless of if they have a plan elsewhere.
Oh, so he would, because Eric has a 401 at Sam's, so then we start up a 401, so then he'd have a 401 there, or does he combine both? And we're gonna have, you guys are gonna have to help me.
We can walk through that, but essentially,
set up.
he could, in that scenario, your company would have its own retirement plan. If he's working somewhere, he could participate in both, because he's subject to the limits cap.
Okay, so where it
That's-
could get missed.
He's still at the other company?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, so that's where we'll have an in-depth conversation,
Yeah.
but.
yeah, there's, make sure he doesn't go over the limits type thing.
Got it. So do I set up a meeting with you, Tyler?
You tell me.
So if these companies that don't currently have a retirement plan have to have one in place by 2025, is there a minimum match then that they're gonna start saying?
Yeah, I know. Well, what's funny is we're still waiting for guidance from the state on what this is gonna look like, and they told us March, but there is no employer contribution. So there is no such, so yes, you're gonna have to, if you don't have your own plan, you're gonna have to be in the state plan. But they're not handcuffing you saying you have to give them a match. It's
Okay.
basically just making sure that they're allowed into that plan.
And
But
I
keep in
don't-
mind, there's that $1,000, up to that $1,000 credit available for the employer contributions,
Right.
which is essentially giving the government's making that contribution for you for the first several years.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
To that point, the problem with one of the biggest problems with that plant, that whole thing is there's no guidance. Because that money gets invested by the State Board of Investment,
Yep.
but they can't tell you what to invest in, they don't give you any guidance. So that employee is blindly doing what they're doing, day in,
Correct.
day out. State Board of Investment cannot give you any guidance on what to do with that
Yep,
money. So
it's, exactly, that's
to
a
me,
great
it's a
point.
it's a short-sighted plan with not enough guidance and meat into it to make it work.
Yeah, it can create a lot of problems, because Betsy touched on it before, because it's essentially like an IRA, and if they're over the income limits, they can't actually even put money in there, or if they're contributing somewhere else, right? So like, that individual is gonna have to know, and the employer has to know, because I think there's some actual potential penalties associated with, or that they're discussing, if it's not done all correctly.
Yeah, the Attorney General can come after the employee right
Correct.
up to $10,000.
So
Yeah.
it's a big mess, so like,
It is
they wanna
nice.
get ahead of that, the employers, and it's what, 5 or more employees, I think, right now?
It's more than
Yeah.
5.
Yeah, more than 5.
So I think we have time for one more question. Michelle, can you
Yeah.
go?
I just wanted to clarify something from earlier. I think Doug asked the question, and it sounded like an answer. If an employer has a retirement plan in place, but it's not a 401K plan, it's an IRA plan, that has to change into a 401K?
Nope,
Okay.
yeah, you're good there.
So if you have something pre-existing,
You're good.
there's nothing that needs to be done?
Nothing needs to be done. So the rule is really some sort of qualified retirement plan needs to be in place, which would be like a SEP or a simple. Now, but because it is being mandated now, that's where it's important to, we meet and say, well, what would make sense? Would a SEP make sense, a simple, a 401K? So that's where we just tailor it to the goals, but the, tax credits kind of make it.
The tax credits are getting people to make changes potentially from a simple to the 401K.
I think we're
Okay,
up
thank
though,
you.
but
We are, yes, thank you.
everybody-
All right.
So if everybody can.
Everybody.
And Jacobs Financial.
Appreciate it.
Andy, do you have a card on this?
I do.
Presentation real quick. All right, this next speaker is Jeff Clancy.
Jeff is from Clinton. He'll be speaking on the Corporate Transparency Act. One of the things about Jeff that I like is he's from Bloomfield, Michigan, so he actually works for my Detroit Tigers. But in case you're a Minnesota fan, he also works for the Minnesota Vikings. So, but he is his practices focuses on entity formation, business transactions, contract drafting, mergers and acquisitions. And he's talking to us today about the Corporate Transparency Act. And here's your right here. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is again Jeff Clancy. I'm a corporate transactional attorney at Quinlan and Hughes. I'm here to talk about the Corporate Transparency Act. Has anyone heard of it or not heard of this act? It came into effect January 1st, 2024. If you're an owner of a business or you have substantial control of a business, this is probably applicable to you. So first, just a disclaimer, this is just for educational purposes. As an attorney, it's kind of an obligation to say that. So if you have any questions, you can contact the attorney or feel free to give me a call. My contact information will be at the end of the presentation. So just by way of backgrounds, the Corporate Transparency Act is really a product of 9/11 and trying and for giving law enforcement a tool to investigate who's funding either terrorist attacks or money laundering or so other financial crimes. So again, Congress passed this act to combat money laundering, tax fraud, financial crimes by requiring an annual disclosure by company applicants, the company, and beneficial owners to the United States Treasury Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, which is the acronym is FinCEN. So that's where you would report this information to, and we'll go over those requirements. So before the Corporate Transparency Act, which again was enacted January 1st of 2024, there was really no way for law enforcement to trail the money and find who was funding these criminal activities. By the way of the Corporate Transparency Act, through these filings, they have a tool to investigate. Although it's very broad, there's still a lot of questions out there on what information is needed and who's required to make these filings. So there are both exempt and non-exempt entities, and we'll go through those throughout the presentation. So what are the reporting requirements under the Corporate Transparency Act? So this applies to both domestic and foreign entities. When I say domestic, that's a United States entity, or a foreign entity which is created in another country but is registered to do business in the United States. So a domestic reporting company essentially means a limited liability company, a corporation, or any other entity which is created by filing a document with the Secretary of State. So this is kind of the triggering event, as I call it, or the catch-all. If you had to file articles of organization or a corporation or any type of document with the Secretary of State to form the entity, then you're probably going to be captured under the Corporate Transparency Act. So a foreign entity, again, would be required to report under the Corporate Transparency Act if they are registered to do business in the United States. They are registered to do business in the United States, typically by filing that foreign document with the Secretary of State. So, meeting the definition of a reporting company. Well, there are entities that may not need to report because they filed that document with the Secretary of State. Examples of entities that may not be required to file under the Corporate Transparency Act would be general partnerships, trusts that do not have to file with the Secretary of State, limited liability partnerships that are not created by filing or required to file with the Secretary of State, entities resulting from statutory conversion where the conversion does not create the entity, and foreign entities that do not register to do business in the United States. Again, if you're any of those, I think general partnerships would probably be most applicable for folks in this room. You wouldn't be captured under the requirements of the Corporate Transparency Act. So there are exempt entities as well. In other words, entities that are not required to file under the Corporate Transparency Act. There are 23 in all.
I'm not gonna go through all 23, but I'll give you some examples. So there's publicly traded entities, government entities or authorities, inactive entities, in other words, dissolved or administratively dissolved entities that meet certain requirements, subsidiaries of exempt reporting company, banks and credit unions, highly regulated industries, for example, public utilities, telecommunications. I'm a telecom attorney as well, kind of a niche practice. And then probably relevant for this room are 501c tax exempt organizations are not captured under the Corporate Transparency Act. And then this, again, is probably applicable to folks in this room, are taxable entities that have more than 20 full-time U.S. employees, with a physical office in the United States, and have more than $5 million in gross receipts or sales.
Why would they be exempt? The last one.
The statute says.
Those are the people making the money.
Well, so really, the Corporate Transparency Act is really targeted towards small businesses and kind of figuring out where those shell companies are and that are really just entities created to do criminal activity or launder money. So it's not targeted towards the larger entities. But we'll go into why that's important on the larger company exemption, where it's important to track your gross receipts and employees because you may fall under the threshold for that exemption. So the reporting deadlines came out here. So existing companies, so if you're an entity that was formed prior to January 1st, 2024, you need to report no later than January 1st of 2025. So you have this year to make your filing and report. Either the company applicant and beneficial owners. Entities that were formed after January 1st, 2024 need to report no later than 90 calendar days after the formation date. What's the formation date? It's the date you file your articles of organization for a limited liability company or articles of incorporation for a corporation. So you have 90 days if you're formed after January 1st, 2024, and then you have a full year to apply if you're an existing entity prior to January 1st, 2024. So any update to a beneficial owner, which I'll go through the definition of what that is, needs to file within 30 calendar days. So that means like a change of address, an ID change, or anything like that. You'd have 30 days to update that filing. So what are the general reporting requirements, or who needs to report with the Corporate Transparency Act? Essentially, they're going to try and capture, or they want to capture the information about the company, each beneficial owner, which again, I'll go through the definition of what that is. It's very vague, it's very broad. And then the company applicant, which also can capture attorneys and paralegals, so that's where us as professionals need to be careful. And again, beneficial owner, company applicant are defined. So for the company, you have to disclose the full legal name of the entity, any trade name, assumed name, or DBA, a complete current registered address, which we found on in your articles, which are filed with the Secretary of State. And this must be a street address and not a P.O. box. The state, tribal, or foreign jurisdiction of formation. So I think for most folks in this room, that would be Minnesota. But again, if you're a foreign entity, you need to disclose what country you were formed in. And then the taxpayer identification number, so an EIN. So I know that I've had some single member LLCs that use their social security number and they don't obtain an EIN. With the Corporate Transparency Act, social security numbers are not sufficient, so you want to get an EIN. So who are the beneficial owners? This is probably kind of the most talked about or discussed part of the Act. It's very vague and it captures a lot of people, so you need to be careful. This is where I think it'd be a good idea to consult with an attorney. So the beneficial owner is an individual, notice that it's an individual, who directly or indirectly, so they capture both, exercises substantial control, which is a term of art and is defined, over the entity, and then or owns or controls not less than 25% of the ownership interest of the entity. So you notice there's an or there, right? So it captures folks that own not less than 25% of an ownership interest in the entity, but it also captures those folks that have substantial control over the entities. Maybe a CEO, CFO, or someone who's, or a board of directors for a corporation, or a board of governors for an LLC if you have that. So again, this is a very broad definition, and again, it captures the individual. So what is substantial control? Again, we have a 25% threshold, and then the substantial control. So when you're trying to navigate who do I need to close, typically substantial control means a senior officer, someone who has the authority over appointment or removal of senior officers. So again, that would be like the board of directors. Has direction, determination, or decision of, or substantial influence over important matters of the company. So if that goes to the CEO directly, where the member may have to file because they own 25%, but most of the control is with the senior officer, then that senior officer would be captured under the filing. So again, the definition is purposely vague, and what is important is the control aspect of the analysis. So who's controlling the decisions of the entity? It's not the title of the individual, it's who maintains that control. So there are exceptions to who would be considered a beneficial owner. So minor children are not included. So if for some reason through maybe a minor child inherits an interest in an entity, then the parent or the legal guardian would be the owner. So individuals acting as a nominee or an intermediary, custodian, or agent on behalf of another individual would not be a beneficial owner. Individuals whose interest in an entity is only through the right of inheritance would not be captured as a beneficial owner. And then creditors of a reporting person if the creditor is itself not a beneficial owner. In other words, the creditor doesn't take over the entity's ownership if it was pledged as collateral. So we talked about the company's information needs to be disclosed to FinCEN. We talked about the vague definition of beneficial owner, which you would have to navigate to figure out who would be a beneficial owner. So then now the company applicant's also captured as to who needs to file. So this can be up to 2 individuals when you're filing on the website. So again, this is vague as well. It's the individual who directly files the organizational or incorporating documents with the Secretary of State, or the individual who has the primary responsibility for directing or controlling the filing of the organizational or incorporating document. So us as attorneys, historically, we've been the incorporator or the organizer. In other words, we'll draft the articles of organization or incorporation, sign as the organizer, and under the statute here, that would capture us as a company applicant, so therefore we would have to disclose our information. So again, this likely captures the incorporated organizer, in other words, the person that signs the organization or incorporation, a CEO who may have direct control over that document and the filing thereof. And then again, attorneys and paralegals or general counsel can be captured as the company applicant and would have to file with FinCEN. So this was a great debate in the business law section here in the state of Minnesota, and I know throughout the country, was that some of us as attorneys were in a slight sheer panic, as up until recently the statute wasn't clear on if the company applicant would have to file for those entities we created prior to January 1st, 2024. So I know some of my colleagues have been practicing law for 30 plus years. You can imagine how many entities they've created. To go back and try and capture that information and file it is near impossible, and luckily we were able to navigate that, and so that is not required. So if the entity was created and registered before January 1st, 2024, the company applicant does not need to provide his or her information. Now, entities created after January 1st, 2024 must include information on the company applicant, which we'll go through what that required information is. So typically it's a personal information. It's really a unique number identifier. So it would be found on a driver's license, a passport, or a government ID that's, again, in good standing. Or the company applicant, or the beneficial owner for that matter. If you're not comfortable uploading your license or passport information, you can obtain a FinCEN unique identifier number, but just be cautious of that. It's a very quick way to make these filings, but you have a perpetual obligation to maintain that number. In other words, if you move, you have to update your address with FinCEN, and again, that's in kind of in perpetuity, there's no way to terminate that. So a lot of clients I see use their driver's license number for their unique identifier. So what exactly needs to be recorded for a company applicant would be their full legal name, date of birth, and your current address. Typically, this would be a residential address, but for myself, I use my company's address if I'm captured as a company applicant. So again, I touched on this a little bit. So the beneficial owner, what's required, or the company applicant, again, this unique identifying number is important. I just spoke on this. The number can be found on a non-expired government ID, non-expired passport, driver's license, or a non-expired foreign passport if the beneficial owner or company applicant does not have any of the above, or a foreign citizen. So what's important is that there's this unique number that you're going to disclose to FinCEN. Again, social security numbers do not qualify for the be used. So there's probably some folks that are involved in nonprofits or maybe involved in banking or other exempt entities. You have to be careful, although maybe not so much for the banking. But if you do lose your tax exemption status, then you would be captured under the Corporate Transparency Act for disclosure. So you have 30 days upon that event to then file with FinCEN, the company applicant, if that's applicable, and then of course the beneficial owner, which is their definition. So I think I touched on this on the first slide. So what's important are is that large company exemption. So if you're claiming that you have over 20 employees, you have a U.S. office, and you do gross over $5 million, it's very important internally to track that. Track your employees, track your gross revenue. So therefore, if there is any question, you can always represent that you fall under that exemption. And then this is the website, this fincen.gov /BOI beneficial owner information. That's essentially the website you go to file. It costs nothing to file, but in any event, if you do have questions, I would recommend talking to an attorney to help navigate those requirements. So, big shocker, there are penalties if you don't comply, right? So and they're stiff. This is something that I think every small business needs to take into consideration. As again, this statute is targeted at small businesses. So failure to file, or if you provide false or fraudulent reports, you have a civil fine of up to $500 for each day that you're in violation. So that could add up, right? Or you can have a criminal fine of up to $10,000. And up to 2 years of imprisonment, or both. So the penalties are stiff. So I would maybe review your corporate record book, review when you formed your entity, see if you fall where you fall. If you were formed this year, then you would want to again disclose your company applicant, the beneficial owner analysis, disclose those. If you were filed prior to this year, then of course the company applicant would not be relevant. But in any event, I think it takes. Important for you to review your articles or your governing documents to see when you were organized and see when you file. So another really kind of important question that I get on this is, well, this is some pretty personal information that we're filing with the government, the U.S. Treasury Department, with FinCEN. Who can access this information? Well, the good thing is that this does not fall under the Freedom of Information Act. In other words, folks can't just go and sweep in and pick up your passport information and your driver's license. So it is regulated. It's reported directly to FinCEN, and it is confidential, and it's retained for 5 years by FinCEN. So the reported information can only be disclosed upon request, either by a law enforcement agency, national security agency, an intelligence agency, and when it gets down into this, since it is a federal act, if it's state, local, foreign government agency or a tribal law, then only by court order would that information be disclosed. So those are really the ways that this information can be disclosed, and it's upon request. You can imagine how probably overwhelmed FinCEN is at this time. I mean, if you think about how many things are created daily, I know that, probably per week I created many, and I've done many of these filings. So everybody's really navigating this as it's relatively new, and I know from the government's perspective, there's a lot of information coming in, and they have to figure out how to store it and organize it. So just recently, I know in Alabama, federal district judge actually said that the Corporate Transparency Act is unconstitutional. So that's probably going to go, I would imagine, go all the way up to the Supreme Court. So that's something to follow to see if that's something that will be overturned. Any questions? I got the 5-minute mark, so I guess I nailed it on my slides.
So if we weren't here at this meeting today, how would anybody have known about this Corporate Transparency Act, and how and when do you file?
So good question. So I know that the Minnesota Secretary of State sent out an email to all the emails that are associated with the articles that were filed. So an email blast was sent out, I want to say in December or January, maybe even November of last year. So if you didn't get that email, then you wouldn't be notified. But that was kind of something that the state, they didn't have an obligation to do it, but the state sent out that email. Otherwise, it's really kind of, I guess, been up in the news. The federal government hasn't sent out any notices that I know of. But I think, like I said, if your entity was formed prior to January 1, 2024, you have all of this year to file. It takes 30 seconds to file.
So how do you do it? Just go to FinCEN?
Yeah, so this www.fincen.gov/DOI. That would be the website to check. It walks you through it. You just need your EIN and your
And you just have to file it once, and
Yeah.
then you just have to update it if something changes.
right, updated if there's a change of ownership. Let's say somebody comes in as an address, registered address changes, another beneficial owner comes in, you update your ownership that way. If you sell your company or if you buy a company, then you have 30 days, like I said, to update the beneficial ownership information.
Adding an owner, does you're exempt before and change your LLC and add someone, does that trigger now you have to report?
Well, if you're exempt, then no. So I'd imagine you're talking about the large companies.
Well, no, I'm talking about if you filed 484 or 2024, if you've already been, you were organized before 2024, does that not exempt you or?
No, so then you just, the company applicant, you don't have to file a company applicant if you're existing. So if you're a non-exempt entity, in other words, you have to file, and you were organized or incorporated prior to January 2024, then now the company applicant doesn't have to file, but the beneficial owner still have to file. So in other words, if you brought in a new owner, though, let's say this year or next year, then you'd want to update that filing. I'm sorry if that wasn't clear. The company applicant was the only one that would be excluded.
Can you speak to this from a vendor payment perspective? I mean, as I'm listening to this, I heard you say that LLCs can no longer have a social security number. If we're paying somebody and they give us a W-9 that says that they're an LLC and they're using the tax ID number, should we reject those and say you need to do a new one? Or should we just keep doing what we're doing and assume that people are...
Yeah, so I mean, from my perspective, this is a company obligation. So if the company is not following the rules, then I don't see as a vendor or someone doing business with that company, I don't know what
So
liability
if
would
we're
be
sending a
there.
1099 or something along those lines, and we're getting kickback, it's not our responsibility, I mean, I guess what
Probably-
I'm trying to make sure is if we're accepting W-9s for contracts that we're on the up and up.
So probably, don't want to give too much legal advice, probably a good question for an attorney, but for the purposes of this presentation, is only from the filing perspective,
Okay.
you can't use your social security number.
Thank you.
Did I answer your question? Okay.
All right, thank you, Jeff.
All right, thanks.
Yes. I think so too.
Well, thank you. I think there's some clarification. Amy and I were talking on the side about this. Obviously, more to come. I was like, wait a minute, LLCs have a tax ID. Okay, hold on, there's a whole nother thing. You also might have seen this on the bank level too. I was just gonna mention really quick, sometimes there's beneficial ownership that the banks have had to start to ask for. So if you are opening a business account or making updates to your business account, that's something you will start seeing, or if you haven't already, beneficial ownership. So just a side note, because I've been a banker for too long. So, all right, we are going to move on. So we have the new Minnesota cannabis laws in the workplace. I know some of you have said, does this apply to me? What will I learn from this? I would recommend sticking around and definitely find out. Ellie joined Crittenden Hughes PA as an attorney in February of 2021. She practices in the area of civil litigation with a focus of employment and government liability and criminal prosecution. Ellie is active with the Minnesota Defense Lawyers Association, where she serves as a co-chair on the new Defense Lawyers Committee. She also received the Deb Orlander New Lawyer Award from the Minnesota Defense Lawyers Association in 2022 for her leadership, professionalism, skills, and advocacy for the practice of law. Please welcome Ellie.
Hello everyone, thank you for being here. I'm the last speaker today, so I won't take up too much of your time. We'll get you out a little early. My presentation is not as interesting as Jeff's, but we'll try to get you some good information. With this new law, there's a lot of information, so I'm doing a quick overview of some points that I think are most important to pull from this. Obviously, like Jeff said too, it's pertinent if you have additional questions to actually talk to an attorney, but try to get you some good information and give it to you with something useful. So we'll talk about statutory changes to DATWA. That is the statute and the law in Minnesota governing drug and alcohol testing in Minnesota. We'll talk about specific testing for cannabis because of course this law relates to cannabis testing, and that's kind of thrown a wrench into everybody's plans with regard to how they've been either implementing testing or not implementing testing and maybe considering doing it. We'll specifically talk about safety-sensitive positions because, from my perspective, that's probably most pertinent to many of you in this room, although we will talk about other exceptions as well. Just won't go into as much detail. And then some best practices, too, with regard to this. So, statutory changes. Of course, cannabis is now a lawful consumable product in Minnesota. This went into effect July 1 of 2023, so it's already been in effect, so hopefully you all are aware of this. If not, try to catch you up quickly here. But again, like I said, it's now a lawful consumable product. What that means is that there's certain parameters with regard to testing for this. And of course, before you're free to test, no problem. Now you have to follow certain outline statutory requirements if you do want to test your employees for cannabis. Like I said, July 1, 2023. So essentially what this does, again, it's statutory language up there. We have the possession. What does that mean? The use. What does that mean? This isn't necessarily pertinent to you all with regard to being employers, running businesses. But again, it's just pertinent to understand that these are some of the parameters within the statute. But essentially what this new law did is it did create two testing schemes or setups with regard to cannabis. So there's some changes. There are also other things that did not change. And we will focus on specifically what did change, but we'll also touch on what is still the same. So, the pertinent part. Cannabis cannot be used or possessed in multiple locations. There's a lot in the statute. What we'll focus on is on the employer's premises if they're operating your machinery, a vehicle, or equipment too. So we oftentimes get the question, well, what does this mean? Can I still have a drug-free workplace? You certainly can. You just have to be cautious when you're doing that. But again, nobody can be under the influence of cannabis on your premises, operating your machinery, operating your vehicles, anything like that. The law does not permit individuals to do that. So that's a good thing that came out of this at least. DATWA. So again, Minnesota Drug and Alcohol Testing in the Workplace Act. Hopefully you all are familiar with this. This has been around for a long time. It applies to all Minnesota employers, including public sector employers as well. So again, applies to all, if you're planning on testing. So I will say that's the little caveat too. You don't necessarily have to test or have, and I'll touch on this at the end, a policy in place to test. If you don't want to, that's up to you, but if you do, you have to abide by this act. Cannabis testing. So this is one of the things that is pertinent to point out. The law specifically permits employers to test, but also you have to be cautious. So it creates a new type of test under DATLA for when an employer tests for the presence or absence of cannabis flower, cannabis products, or potency hemp edibles, hemp-derived consumer products, or cannabis metabolics. So, authorized drug and alcohol testing within DATLA does not include cannabis testing unless otherwise stated, and we'll talk about the exceptions with regard to that. So testing for cannabis, what has not changed? If you all are testing, you should be familiar with these 5 tests here. So you have the job applicant, routine physical examination, random testing, reasonable suspicion, and treatment program. That is something that did not change. You still have those 5 tests. However, within those, there are some changes. So 1 and 2, we have the job applicant and the routine physical examination. So you can only test for cannabis under those if one of the, I think there's 7 exceptions apply, so we'll talk about all of those in the next few slides. That has not changed. With regard to 3, 4, and 5, so we have random, reasonable suspicion, and treatment program. Under each of those, the law changed a little bit to implement the cannabis testing into those 3 specifically. And what that means is that you have to look at the statute, which outlines specifically when you can do this cannabis testing. For example, here with random testing, the individuals have to be employed in a safety-sensitive position. That's one of the requirements. There's also an or, but again, I don't think this is all as applicable to you with the professional athletes, but I may be wrong. So we'll focus on the safety-sensitive position for the random testing. With the reasonable suspicion, as you can see up on the slide here, there are certain things, situations I will say, where you can do this reasonable testing for cannabis. However, some of them, say first one specifically, some of the influence of drugs or alcohol. That's pretty vague. I would not cite to that necessarily if you are going to do a reasonable suspicion test for an employee that you believe is under the influence of drugs or alcohol. I won't go into this in as much detail, but it's important to identify impairment, and there's certain factors. So if you're going to assume or see someone and you think they are, you really want to identify what those factors are and back up your reasoning for that. I could spend a whole entire hour discussing impairment and everything like that, so I won't bore you with that, but just keep that in mind if you're going to proceed under that one. Then we have violated the employer's written work rules. That's a pretty basic one, but again, that's kind of tough too, simply because you just want to make sure that you have enough backing when you are actually proceeding under this reasonable suspicion testing. We also have that has sustained a personal injury or caused another employee to sustain a personal injury, and then cause a work-related accident, or is operating or helping it operate, and was involved in a work-related accident. So a couple different prongs there. Keep those in mind if you want to proceed, but that was one thing that changed with regard to the cannabis testing. And then treatment program, I won't spend time on that. That's a pretty straightforward one as well. So what has changed too? Like I said, there's been a lot of different things that went into this new statutory law, and essentially what this law did is it created a new category of testing, as I touched on a little bit, which is separate from... To be more clear, I would so, let's see. Yes, so there's 2 different, students here. We have the new category testing for cannabis, and then we also have another one which is separate from drug and alcohol testing. Here, unless one of the exceptions applies, which again, I think that's on, next slide. We'll talk about that. So a couple different exceptions. Unless those apply, this new law says you cannot test for cannabis or THC for job applicants, again, or routine physical exams. We talked about that. An employer cannot require a job applicant to undergo cannabis testing solely for the purpose of determining whether the presence or absence of cannabis is present as a condition of employment. An employer cannot refuse to hire a job applicant solely because the job applicant tests positive for cannabis. And I've had some people ask, or this has been a situation since the law has changed. So we've had to talk through this, and there's certain requirements if you do want to proceed this way. But again, if you have a job applicant that's not being hired for a safety sensitive position, you really want to consider potentially changing the drug testing process to just eliminating cannabis altogether. So that would be a good safeguard, because that may also come into play, you know, if you decide not to hire them. And they could claim, I mean, I'm not saying they would win, but if they did test positive for cannabis, and you know that as the employer, you still proceed not to hire them for a different reason, that could potentially lead to some litigation. So it is a benefit to consider taking that off of the drug screening for job applicants if they're not in a safety sensitive position. Bullet point 4, we have an employer's response to a positive cannabis test may be different depending on the position being tested, of course. And an employer cannot request an employer or job applicant to submit to cannabis testing on an arbitrary and capricious basis. That's some legally language that's in the statute, so it's something to be aware of. I don't think that will be a huge issue if you just follow, of course, the other requirements under the statute. So these are the exceptions. For the following positions, cannabis and its metabolites, metabolates, always do this, my gosh, excuse me, are considered a drug and subject to the drug and alcohol testing provisions of DATWA, which allows job applicant routine alcohol and drug testing for safety sensitive positions. We'll go into detail about that one. Police officers, firefighters, positions requiring face-to-face care, training, education, supervision, counseling, consultation, position requiring a commercial driver's license. So, you know, if you have individuals that obviously have their CDLs, they're going to be regulated by the DOT anyway, so those regulations still apply. This does not impact that, so be aware of that as well if you do have individuals with CDLs. Any other position of employment funded by a federal grant or any other position for which state or federal law requires testing of a job applicant or an employee for cannabis. Like I noted throughout this entire thing, the recreational marijuana statute still considers cannabis a drug, you know, so that's something to consider, but again, it's legal, the recreational use despite that, and that's really what the focus is here. Before we get into our safety sensitive positions, I just want to draw your attention to post-injury, post-accident testing. This is a situation, and this is separate from what we went through with regard to the reasonable suspicion testing previously. You can still test individuals for cannabis if it involves a post-injury or post-accident situation. This is not limited to the following exceptions, the previous exceptions will say. Those positions, you don't have to meet one of those to do this testing. So keep that in mind too if you want to test someone with regard to cannabis, if they're involved in something like this.
So if they get hurt, and how do you prove that they were actually under the influence at the time when they can legally have it in their system?
That's tough. That's a great question. And so that comes down to, I mean, depending upon, I think there's a certain amount threshold that you can look to, and I don't know that off the top of my head, but that's something that you would test for, and if they have that, that would be.
So there are different levels when they do the testing?
Yes, correct. Yeah, and like I said, I can't remember the threshold off the top of my head, but I know there is one, so that's what I would look for. And again, I mean, cannabis testing obviously is tougher than testing for alcohol, and that's what employers' biggest concerns are, because yeah, you can just have a PBT or whatever it may be, and it'll show, but cannabis in your system, if they go home and they smoke, or whatever it may be, so just look to the threshold. So let's talk a little bit about safety sensitive positions. There is a definition for this. It's defined as a job including any supervisor, management position in which an impairment caused by drugs, alcohol, or cannabis usage would threaten the health or safety of any person. This is somewhat vague, I will say. It's difficult, and we oftentimes deal with companies, employers asking us, what does it mean to be in a safety-sensitive position? Is this person safety-sensitive versus another? And I'll talk a little bit more detail about why it's important to be specific when you're classifying individuals in safety-sensitive positions. And some of these positions are clear, they're operating big, huge pieces of machinery, and one wrong move would injure someone. Then there's other positions that are kind of walking the line a little bit, but it's important to just know. You have the definition there. It's not very helpful, I don't think personally, but it is what it is. Not very surprising. The statute itself has some procedural requirements that you have to follow. I'll say recommendations, but they are requirements too, with regard to these safety-sensitive positions. So the first one being provide an employer applicant with an acknowledgement form developed by the employer on which to acknowledge that the employee or the job applicant has seen the employer's drug and alcohol testing or cannabis testing policy. So if you have a written policy, obviously you're permitted to test individuals. If you don't have one, you're not going to meet this requirement. You don't want to be testing any of your employees or job applicants if you don't have a written policy in place. So if you do, make sure you have that acknowledgement form just to, for your file, for everything else, just so they know what you're testing and what that means. And your testing must be conducted by an accredited, certified testing lab. That's nothing new. That shouldn't be surprising. That it is what it is. That's the same for every other testing for any other drug. And then chain of custody procedures must be followed by employers and labs as well. That comes down to obviously collecting a sample, where it goes, whatever it might be. Just make sure that all of that is clean and you're following what's required of the statute. We have some best practices here. So this is what we advise when we're dealing with individuals who are asking, what do we do for safety-sensitive positions? How do we go about either classifying certain positions as that, or what do we do? A couple different things up there for you, and a lot of these steps, like with Jeff, with the damages or with the penalties, there's penalties under this as well if you don't follow the statute. And that can include punitive damages, attorney's fees, other form of damages. So you really want to make sure that you're taking the best proactive approach to ensure that you're complying with the statute. And some of that would include designating an HR person to classify safety-sensitive positions throughout the company. So you have one individual or two individuals that are talking through each job description if you have those available, and checking off what makes it safety-sensitive, and make sure that that's consistent among all of the positions that you're analyzing and the factors that are objective in making those decisions. You want to research safety-sensitive natures of various positions and save all backup documentation, including any OSHA guidance. And that's a great place to start. OSHA obviously is very helpful in terms of what is dangerous or not. So if you want to use those resources, articles, studies, whatever it may be, to bolster your position in a certain position that is safety sensitive, that would be great. You can draft a business justification memo too, which identifies these safety sensitive positions and the reasoning for each classification. So again, if you've ever heard me talk about anything, documentation is always good. We like documentation if you ever get sued. And it's very helpful, and it's helpful for many different reasons, but just make sure you document everything, especially when you're reasoning for certain decisions. So we have bullet point 4, when developing drug testing policies for safety-sensitive roles, employers should devote time and resources to an audit of the specific tasks involved in all of the jobs that may be safety-sensitive. This is important if you have, hopefully do a job description for these positions specifically. But make sure that the tasks and the duties on these job descriptions are actually things that these individuals are doing every day, or not necessarily going to be every day, but it is certainly a task and a duty and an expectation of the employer that this individual is doing, because it won't be helpful if you work off the job description, and the job description is not accurate to what these individuals are doing in the field. Employers should use an objective, factual analysis to evaluate whether positions are safety sensitive, and then you should also look at the tasks performed by the employees, not just the title. Again, that kind of reiterates everything that I've been saying, but it is very important to be specific when you're classifying these positions. We'll switch gears a little bit now, and this is another part of the statute. So if you want to test, you have to have a written policy in place, and it's helpful. The statute tells us the minimum minimum information you have to have in these policies. There's 6 points up there. We have to have the employee job applicants that are subject to the testing. So who is being tested, right? You have that group of individuals. You have the circumstances under which drugs and alcohol testing may be requested or required. The right of an employer job applicant to refuse to undergo drug and alcohol testing and the consequences of the refusal. Any disciplinary or other adverse personnel action that may be taken based on a confirmatory test verifying a positive test result on an initial screening test. And then we have the right of an employer job applicant to explain a positive test result and any other appeal procedures available. So many of you are probably familiar with these requirements. If you have your policies, these drug and alcohol testing policies are generally longer than many that are probably in your handbook. I know you do a lot of handbook reviews, and this is one area that we check and double check just to make sure that all of the pertinent information is in there, because this list may not seem long, it may not seem tedious, straightforward, but really when we're drafting these, it gets to be specific. You want to be specific, and they generally end up being longer, but it's good because you want to have all of this information in there. And again, it's helpful. The language of the statute is pretty clear. You just want to expand on that if you do have your policy in place. And in addition to all of those too, there's always those fund notice requirements. That's in the statute too. So you have your written policy. You obviously want to provide it to job applicants, employees, and it will be all affected employees. If you have an employee who was not affected by this policy, and then they change positions, whatever it may be, you will want to provide them with this as well. So Minnesota law is very clear, and there's always notice requirements, so just be aware that there's one for this as well. Employers may impose discipline for violating certain policies. Again, this is pulled from the statute. Employees are not free to just be under the influence whenever they want, That's, again, one of the main points here is that you can still enforce a drug, alcohol-free workplace. You're free to do that, although with this cannabis being used recreationally, maybe a little more difficult. But you do have certain options in terms of when you can discipline. And the reasoning there is pretty straightforward, but also pretty vague too. So they violate your written policy, of course. Any other reason, if there's cannabis tests and it's verified, and again, whether you're testing a job applicant or an employee, there's certain procedures you also have to follow too. So they have one first positive test. You're going to want to get that confirmed. They can explain it. All the things that I've been talking about too. So just know, and I think the important thing to pull from this is that there's certain procedures to be followed, so you can test in certain situations, but you just want to make sure that you're doing it right and you're not swaying from what's required by the statute. Employers are not required to accommodate cannabis. This is specific in the statute. Again, you don't have to permit the use. Obviously, that's the whole point of this law, that you can still enforce your work or your drug-free workplace. And the law specifically states, there's under no circumstance you have to accommodate that. I think that's helpful. And it may come down to an ADA claim, whatever it may be, and you have an employee that comes to you and says, look, I need to smoke on my lunch break, or I need to do this. There's no requirement that you accommodate that. It's not reasonable. It's not required, and I think it's good that the statute specifically states that too. So with all of that said, and I think I said this throughout the presentation too, you don't have to test your employees at all. It's up to you as the employer whether or not you actually want to, and whether or not you want to implement these these testing procedures and policies. If you do, like I said, you need to have a written policy in place. If you don't have a written policy in place and you try to test your employees, that's not going to go well. So don't do that. But you don't have to. Like I said, there's also many different ways that you can still enforce a workforce or work environment that is drug-free and alcohol-free. Although, of course, it is harder, it can actually test, but it is what it is. I said too, you can change your drug testing panel to exclude cannabis if you choose to do so if you are testing your employees. But the employers can still enforce a drug-free workplace without testing policies. So what we suggest doing, and this is going to help with an employer, training your managers and supervisors to spot impairment. Again, I could spend a whole hour talking about impairment, the signs of impairment, whatever it may be. But do that training. You know, take that step because there's certain discipline that you can do if someone's under the influence of alcohol, whatever it may be. Be strategic about interactions with employees before and during working hours. Document, document, document. I knew I had that in here somewhere. I included it in all of my presentations. Address performance and conduct concerns. So this is important because you really want to tie any disciplinary action to specific performance or conduct concerns versus just saying, you know, I think this individual is under the influence of alcohol, or they come in and their eyes are watery, and, you know, I'm just saying they would sit in the car on their lunch break and smoke. You know, it's much more proactive, I will say, if you can tie certain conduct and any discipline that you associate with that to the performance or anything like that. So specifically if you're not testing individuals, you don't have that false stream in the backup. You do have policies, follow that one of course. Focus on objective job performance and conduct. You always want to be objective when you're assessing individuals. And on that basis, when discharge decisions on violations of policies and procedures without reference to the drug and alcohol components. What do we do now? Review and update existing drug and alcohol testing policies related to cannabis. So this will be a huge thing if you haven't already done that. Like I said, it went into effect July 1, 2023. So if you haven't updated it, suggest doing that. We've been revising a lot of policies just to make sure you're compliant with the law. Continue to communicate your drug and alcohol-free workplace rules. If you want to do some additional training with this new law, with your new policy, it's never a bad idea to implement that training and just make your employees aware, because that'll also make it clear about what your expectations are, especially when you're changing something. Identify positions that meet one of the testing exemptions, and inform and train your managers and supervisors to be aware of and spot impairment as part of ongoing commitment to workplace safety. So a couple different things I will leave you with, a little to do. Here's the lovely disclaimer that Jeff mentioned as well. I do mine at the end, but it is the same. So that's what I have for you today. If we have any questions.
If you have a supervisor that has not undergone the reasonable suspicion training, can they still send somebody to be tested, or is there any legal ramifications? Because we offer that, but we may have missed some people in the training.
Yeah, that's fine. What I would suggest is just, it sounds like you have people that are familiar with it, so maybe if you have an internal conversation, just so they know with regard to reasonable.
So there's no law requiring that someone have that training?
Correct.
Correct.
Yep.
You were talking about safety sensitive and kind of that definition, I think.
Yeah.
So there's maybe a misunderstanding in our company about, just because you have the title of supervisor, making that a safety sensitive position and testing everyone that goes into a supervisor or lead position.
Right. So you really want to look at their duties. If you have a and oftentimes with individuals, if they have safety sensitive positions working underneath them and they're on the field with them, you can likely classify the supervisor as safety sensitive, but just the position itself, supervisor, I would not focus on the title, I would focus on their tasks and duties, and if they are out in the field performing these certain things that would qualify them as safety sensitive, then that's a fine classification. But if there's been, is that the issue?
Yeah, And if you have employees that, because, you know, if you have drivers, obviously they're operating the trucks. But if you have office personnel that go out and they use a company vehicle to drive to a job fair, or they bring the mail to the post office, that's not safety sensitive.
Right. Well, and just operating a company vehicle, arguably, I would say that likely wouldn't even meet it. They would need some additional, I mean, because everybody that operates a company vehicle doesn't, yeah. I would not classify them as safety sensitive if that is all they do.
A company vehicle?
Yeah, yeah.
What about a truck, or they require a CDL?
No, so, and this is where it gets tricky because it really comes down to all of their duties. I would assess it fully, so I wouldn't just focus on, they have a truck, they're driving to and from whatever it may be. And arguably, I don't know if that would simply be enough to classify it as a safety sensitive position. You really want to look at everything they're doing objectively as a whole. But yes, if you have a company that's just saying they're driving a company vehicle and that's safety sensitive, that would make me nervous.
Yep, thank you.
Yep.
Okay.
Anybody else?
Just a quick, I guess, question. Could anybody in this room Google reasonable suspicion training and come up with somebody locally that can do that, or do you have recommendations for that, or?
So I don't have anyone off the top of my head or anything off the top of my head, but there are good resources out there, so that's something that you can certainly find.
Probably some people in this room that have used that before and probably could network with those people.
Right, yeah, absolutely, and it's not a bad thing. Honestly,
Who
any training
provided
is
reasonable
helpful.
suspicion training?
I do the training, but then I do it for the DOT too, so if you have DOT drivers, you have to do specific training that's compliant with that, so.
Fantastic. There's a resource. That's because I think that's probably the phase one, obviously. You smell alcohol, right?
Oh, right. Well, that's something with cannabis. It's hard to tell.
Any other questions? All right, well, thank you so much. We want to thank all of our speakers that are still here. Thank you all for attending, as I mentioned.
Oh, just that,
the survey.
if I want anything in interest to, we will have some PowerPoints available. I believe we will have the PowerPoint available so that you can, you might be needing it. If not, the chamber has them.
I don't
We can send them out to you. Can you not hear me?
If you need the PowerPoint slides, the chamber will have them, otherwise we will be providing for them, just so you know. Also, the survey is that blue survey for chamber, if you could just fill it out. Just a quick piece, I'll just mention, the Business Development Council and the Government Affairs Council had come together and decided that this is something that small businesses need, so if there is something that you can think of, please let us know. We're looking for ideas and your feedback, so thank you for attending.
Yeah, that would be.
To see if.
Oh, really? More on the. Oh, sure.
Okay. Right, actually, I worked there for 2 while I was going to school. Okay. And then, I became the manager after I graduated. Okay. So when Jill expanded into the next level, all your baby work with me, then I became her builder. That's why I learned from there. Yeah. I'll see you. Yes. You're on my list. And I got, it's Tuesdays usually. Thanks for attending. So I tried you and myself into that. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, I can't remember exactly. Because I put daycare and I was like transitioning into the HR field. So I could have been in working 6
Nice to see you. I go in May.
Oh, okay.
I went to Arizona, but I go in May with Brenda.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. She wants me to go to Key West, do some excursion. I don't know. Okay, whatever you want. Yeah,
Jump
that's
in,
what I
close
said.
your eyes.
I know. Nice to see you.
Guys,
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I probably owe you a full
Yep, and we like Basilica, so we have to test. How you doing? Yep, test of the year, and like, now it's like, it's like not when they're coming, or not if